The price of family, choosing love over legacy. The dinner was supposed to be just another family gathering. A typical Sunday night where the familiar chatter and laughter filled the room. Jason and Lila had been together for over a year now, and despite the occasional tension between their worlds, things had been going smoothly. Jason's family, wealthy and well-established, had always been polite to Lila, if not particularly warm. They never truly embraced her, but they tolerated her, at least that's what Jason thought. Tonight, however, something was different. It started with the looks. Subtle at first, but unmistakable once Jason began to notice. His father, always the life of the party, wasn't his usual self. Jason caught his gaze lingering on Lila a little too long, his eyes narrowing as if sizing her up in a way that felt uncomfortable. The casual remarks about her background, where she grew up, what her family did for a living, started slipping into the conversation more frequently. Jason could feel the tension in the air, thick and unspoken, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Lila, ever graceful and composed, didn't seem to notice the undercurrent of judgment. She laughed along with Jason's cousins, chatted easily about work, about life. But Jason wasn't blind. He could see his mother's disapproving glances when Lila wasn't looking. There was something in the way his mother examined her, something that made Jason's stomach tighten. It wasn't outright hostility, but the subtle air of superiority that Jason had been raised with was unmistakably present. Then came the question that changed everything. "So, Lila?" Jason's mother asked, her tone sweet but laced with a quiet condescension. "What exactly does your father do for a living?" Jason froze. He knew this was coming. His mother's voice was syrupy, almost too pleasant, but the words themselves cut through the air like a knife. Lila, always polite, answered with a smile. "My dad works in construction, and my mom's a nurse," she said, her voice steady. Jason's heart sank. The smile never left her face, but he could see the way her shoulders stiffened just slightly. That wasn't just a question, it was a judgment, wrapped in the guise of curiosity. And as the room grew quieter, Jason felt it, the silent pressure of his parents' expectations weighing down on them. His father, never one to miss an opportunity to comment on someone's social standing, leaned in. "Construction, huh? It's tough to build a life in that world, don't you think?" he remarked, his voice casual, but the words stung. Jason felt his blood pressure rise. His father wasn't just making small talk, he was making a point. And that point was clear. Lila, with her modest background, was somehow lesser, unworthy of the life Jason's family had worked so hard to build. He wanted to defend her, to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. What would it change? They didn't care about Lila's character, her kindness, her intellect. They cared about her place in the world, the place that, in their eyes, wasn't high enough to be worthy of their son. The evening continued with forced pleasantries, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The atmosphere had changed, and no amount of laughter or idle chatter could hide the uncomfortable truth that had been exposed. His family wasn't just questioning Lila, they were questioning his choices. They were questioning his future. Jason sat back in his chair, feeling a cold realization wash over him. His parents weren't just protective. They were controlling. They didn't see Lila as a person, as someone he loved, someone who made him happy. They saw her as an obstacle, a roadblock to the life they had envisioned for him. A life of wealth, power, and status. And for the first time, Jason felt the weight of that truth settle deep in his chest. The week after the dinner, Jason received a call from his parents. His mother's voice, always calm and measured, seemed colder than usual. "We need to talk," she said, her words carrying the weight of finality. Jason's stomach churned as he agreed to meet. When he arrived at their house, his father was already waiting, his stern expression making it clear that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. They sat across from each other in the same living room that Jason had grown up in, surrounded by the gleaming symbols of his parents' success. Expensive furniture, framed degrees, and lavish decor. It was a world Jason had always known, but now it felt foreign to him. "Jason," his father began, his voice steady but heavy with something Jason couldn't quite place. "We need to be honest with you. This relationship of yours with Lila, it's not something we can support. She doesn't fit into our world. She doesn't fit into our circle." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. The words hit him like a slap, a cold wave of reality crashing over him. They weren't worried about his happiness. They weren't concerned with the person he had chosen to spend his life with. They were worried about the image of the family, about how Lila's working-class background didn't align with their polished, flawless facade. For a moment, Jason couldn't speak. He stared at his father, the man who had always held the reins of their family's success, and realized something he had been avoiding for too long. His parents didn't see him, they only saw what he represented. The idea of him as their perfect son, the heir to their legacy. But Jason wasn't interested in the legacy anymore. He had already made up his mind. For the first time, he didn't hesitate. "I'm not going to end things with Lila," Jason said, his voice firm. "I love her. And that's not something you can change." His father's face remained stoic, but there was a flicker of something. Disappointment? Anger? Jason couldn't tell. His mother just nodded, her eyes cold as they locked onto his. "We're just looking out for your future," she said, her voice clipped. "We want what's best for you." Jason stood up, the finality of his decision sinking in with each passing second. "What's best for me isn't something you can control," he replied, his heart racing but his resolve solid. "I'm leaving." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the house, his parents' silence following him like a heavy shadow. The door clicked shut behind him, and with it Jason's old life. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of his decision began to settle in. Jason had chosen Lila, and he would never regret that choice, but the price was high. Without his family's support, they had to start over. They moved into a small apartment, a far cry from the sprawling mansion Jason had once called home. There were no luxury cars parked in the driveway, no housekeepers or personal chefs. But there was love. And that, Jason reminded himself every day, was enough. But reality was relentless. The bills piled up and Jason's freelance work was unpredictable. Some days he wondered how they would make ends meet. He could feel the pressure mounting, the uncertainty of their future hovering over him like a storm cloud. Yet even on the darkest days, Lila never complained. She worked tirelessly, juggling her job as a teacher and helping Jason with whatever side projects he could find. She kept pushing forward, never wavering. And slowly, little by little, things began to get better. Jason started to find more consistent work, and their apartment, once a reminder of what they had lost, began to feel like home. Before I share what happened next, the moment that changed everything for Jason and Lila, let me ask you, have you ever had to choose between your family's expectations and your own happiness? Have you ever stood up for something you believed in, even when it seemed impossible? If you've been there, hit that like button because the story isn't over. It's just beginning. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on standing up for what's right. The journey wasn't easy, but it was theirs, and Jason knew, deep down, it was the only path worth walking. Life was far from easy. Jason had always been accustomed to comfort, but now he found himself grappling with the harsh realities of the world he had chosen. Every job he took, every gig he secured, was a battle. Freelance work didn't bring in much, and the constant pressure of keeping their heads above water weighed on him. But through it all, something began to shift. Slowly, he started finding more opportunities, each one a small victory that propelled him forward. One day, after months of hard work, Jason landed a full-time job at a small tech company. It wasn't glamorous. There were no fancy perks or impressive titles. But it was a start. It wasn't the dream job he had imagined when he was younger, but it felt like progress. He could finally breathe, even if just a little. For the first time, Jason felt the kind of accomplishment he had never known in the cushioned life of his family's wealth. It wasn't just about the paycheck, it was about proving to himself that he was capable, that he could make it on his own. To celebrate, Jason took Lila out to dinner. It wasn't ramen at home or cheap takeout. This time, they went to a real restaurant, a place with dim lighting, crisp tablecloths, and waiters who wore suits. It wasn't extravagant by most standards, but to Jason it felt like a monumental step forward. He watched Lila carefully as they were seated at their table, noticing the way her eyes scanned the menu, the hesitation in her posture. She wasn't used to this kind of luxury, just like him. But this time it was different. When the waiter brought the bill at the end of the meal, Lila caught Jason's gaze, and there was something there, something that made his heart swell. She didn't ask questions, didn't worry about the cost, because for the first time in a long while she could see that Jason was starting to take care of them both. That look in her eyes, that quiet pride, made every struggle, every sleepless night worth it. Yet, despite the small triumphs, Jason couldn't shake the guilt. It was a constant companion, lurking in the corners of his mind. Every time he thought about his parents, about the life he had left behind, he felt it like a weight pressing down on him. The luxury, the security, the acceptance, all of it was still so far from his reach. He could see it in his parents' eyes whenever they tried to reach out, the quiet judgment, the subtle reminders that he was making a mistake. But the guilt wasn't just about his family. It was about Lila too. She had always believed in him, even when he had nothing to offer. She had supported him when things seemed impossible, never once complaining, never once questioning his decisions. Jason admired her strength. He admired the way she balanced her career, her responsibilities, and still made time for him. It was something he had never truly understood before, but now it seemed so real, so genuine. The more Jason spent time in Lila's world, the more he realized how different it was from the one he had grown up in. There was no gloss, no sheen. Life was raw and real, and every day was a testament to the strength it took to survive. Lila didn't live for status or wealth. She didn't care about social circles or what people thought of her. She worked for every penny she earned, fought for every opportunity that came her way. And Jason couldn't help but admire it. It made him wonder about his past life, the one he had once cherished so much. Was it really worth it? The wealth, the privilege, the constant pursuit of status? It all seemed so hollow now. What had he really gained? The more he compared the two worlds, the one he had come from and the one he was building with Lila, the more he realized how empty his old life had been. His family's world was built on expectations, appearances, and success measured by possessions. But Lila's world was different. It was about hard work, about resilience, about staying true to yourself despite what the world might throw at you. Jason began to understand something that had always been right in front of him. True strength wasn't about how much money you had or the status you could claim. True strength was about the ability to keep moving forward when everything felt uncertain, to stand by the ones you loved when the world tried to tear you apart. And in that moment, Jason knew that everything he had fought for, the struggles, the hard work, the sacrifices, was worth it. Because in Lila, he had found something far more valuable than anything money could buy. A love that was real, a future that was his to build, and a strength he had never known he had. Months passed, and slowly, Jason's life began to stabilize. He and Lila had their struggles, as they always would, but they were in it together. Every day was a small victory, a tiny step forward toward the future they were building. Despite the constant challenges, they had carved out a life that was theirs, one that was imperfect but real. And that was enough. But then, out of nowhere, Jason's phone buzzed one evening with a message from his mother. It started as a few casual texts, nothing more than simple questions about how he was doing, how Lila was doing. The messages were polite but laden with something else, something Jason could feel in his bones. Guilt? He didn't know if he could trust them, if he was ready to let them back in. But despite everything, there was a part of him that wanted to believe they had changed, that maybe they had learned something from their past mistakes. He was torn, unsure of what to do. Eventually, he agreed to meet his mother for coffee. It wasn't a reunion, but it was a start, a tentative bridge between the broken pieces of their relationship. As soon as they sat down, Jason could tell something had shifted. His mother, who had always been so confident, so sure of herself, seemed different now, humble, almost apologetic. The woman who had once dictated every decision in his life now looked uncertain, vulnerable. "We've been thinking," she began, her voice softer than Jason remembered. "Maybe we were too harsh." Jason listened in silence, unsure of how to respond. The words seemed genuine, but deep down he felt a tug in his chest. Something was missing. His mother wasn't talking about Lila. She wasn't talking about the person he loved or the life they had fought for. She wasn't asking for forgiveness for how they had treated Lila. She was asking for something else. "We're not asking for handouts," she continued, her eyes lowering to the table. "We just need a place to stay for a few months while we figure this out." Jason's breath caught in his throat. The familiar sting of disappointment washed over him. His mother's apology wasn't for the right reasons. It wasn't about love or understanding. It was about pride, about restoring their image, about getting back to the life they had lost. She was still trying to control the narrative, trying to manipulate him into fixing what they had broken. Jason's heart felt heavy. The realization hit him like a wave crashing onto the shore. They hadn't changed. They weren't sorry for how they had treated Lila or for how they had torn his life apart. They were sorry because they needed something from him. And it made him sick. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. His hands were trembling, but he knew what he had to say. "I'll help you find a place to stay," Jason said firmly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But I'm not offering my home. And I'm not pretending everything is okay. I've built a life with Lila. A life that doesn't depend on your approval." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Jason could see the hurt in his mother's eyes, the silent disbelief that he wasn't falling in line, that he wasn't doing what was expected of him. But there was no going back. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked out of the coffee shop without another word. As he stepped into the cool air outside, he felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the relief of forgiveness, it was the freedom of choice. For the first time in his life, he wasn't bound by his parents' expectations. He wasn't tied to the life they had planned for him. Jason had chosen his own path, a path that was messy, imperfect, but true. And as he walked away from his parents that day, he realized that this decision wasn't about them anymore. It was about the life he had built with Lila. A life built on love, hard work, and honesty. A life that didn't need the validation of anyone else. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Jason was ready to face it. Whatever challenges came next, he knew he had the strength to handle them. Because this time, he was walking forward on his own terms. And that was enough.